Production by
Michael Lofton.
You're watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome back to Reason and Theology. Your host, Michael, on a Thursday evening, joined here by Dizon, returning contributor, who is continuing with his lecture series on the basics of biblical Hebrew, going over pronouns and pronominal suffixes today. But first, before we dive in, let me welcome you back to the show. Lewis, how are you?
I'm doing all right. A little bit tired, but otherwise, I'm all right.
Yeah, good to have you back on. We had a show yesterday. If y'all didn't catch it, Lewis guest hosted RNT and had a discussion with a Muslim. And like I said, if you have not seen it, go and watch it. It was really, really interesting.
Yeah, you know what? I still need some practice on how to host shows effectively, but I think that the more I do it, the better I'll get at it, Lord willing.
I think you did fine. So,
all right.
Yeah.
I'm glad you think so.
Well, let's go ahead and dive in. If you want to take it away and
sure,
initiate the lecture, I'll dive out, but I'll be here.
All right, let me pull up the share screen. All right, there we go. So we're gonna have some fun because we're gonna discuss something that is very controversial, and that is pronouns. Okay, just kidding. It's not actually controversial, at least in Hebrew it isn't. I know that in the English language we have some controversies regarding pronouns, but in Hebrew pronouns are a little bit more less controversial. At least I haven't heard that anyone in modern Hebrew has attempted to fiddle around with pronouns yet by introducing some Hebrew version of Z and Zer, but you never know. But before we get to this, I want to do a translation exercise, and this is chapter 7 of the workbook, where you cover chapter 38. So just a note, you may have noticed already, but I always at the beginning cover the translation exercise that is related to the chapter that we discussed in the previous episode of this. So last time we discussed what is listed as chapter 7 on the textbook. So we'll do chapter 7 of the workbook, which covers the story of Judah and Tamar. And I'll show you how we translate this simplified version of Genesis 38. So let's do this. So in verse 1 it says, Vayhi ba'et hahi vayered Yehuda me'et ha'achim vayered ad ish Adulami Vashem Haish Chira. So it was. So this is a form of haya with the the disjunctive vav, and be'et in that time, and Judah went down from among his brothers, and he went down to a man who was an Adulamite, so Adulami here, And the Shem of the Ish, name of the man, was Kira. So verse 2, Vayar Sham Yehuda bat Ish Knaani v'Shem HaKnaani Shua. Vayikach et bat Shua Laisha. So, and he saw there, so Sham is there. So Judah saw there a woman, so the daughter, sorry, of a Canaanite man, so Bat Ish Knaani. And the name of the Knaani here is Shua. So that's his name. So, and then he took Vaikach et Bat Shua, he took the daughter of Shua as Laisha, as his wife. So notice that we have a construct. We learned what a construct was previously, and here is one example of it. And then in verse 3, Vatahar, Vataled ben, Vaika et Shem haben et Vatahar od, Vataled ben, Vatika et Shem haben. So haben Onan. So here we get the names of the two sons. So she conceived and she begat a son, and he, so there's a change in subject here. He, that is Judah, called the name of the son and then she conceived again, Od is again, and she bore a son, and she, notice how this time it's the mother giving the name, and she called the name of the son Onan. We know who Onan is, so there will be no spoilers here. Verse 5. Vatahar od vateled ben vatikra et Shem haben Shela vahu haya bikaziv be'et hahi. So once again she conceived again, and she bore a son, and she called the name of the son. By the way, Shem haben is a construct. Shela, so that's the name of the third son. And he was in Kazib. So this is the name of a place at that time. So at is time, and then hahi is a demonstrative pronoun meaning that. Verse 6, Vaikach Yehuda isha le'er v'shem ha'isha Tamar v'hi bechor Yehuda ra be'ene Adonai. So Yehuda or Judah took a woman or a wife for So remember that the preposition le can mean to or it can mean for. In this case, it means for. So he took a woman for and the name of the woman was Tamar. And then it says here that was the firstborn of Judah, Bechor Yehuda, another construct. And it says here, Rab Ene Adonai, he was wicked in the eyes of the Lord. So in full, and the firstborn of Judah, was wicked in the eyes of the Lord. And then at the end of that it says, Vayaharog Adonai et and God killed So Yaharog means he killed. And then verse 8, Vayomer Yehuda Onan ki hu yavo el eshet vayibem et Tamar vahaya zera le'er. And Judah said to Onan, I think you guys know where this one's going, because he went to the wife of and he did the brother's duty. So this is a funny little um, verb. So like there's various ways to translate it. You know, took her as sort of like a, you know, it's basically conducted a levirate marriage with heir's wife. So yibum is the term in Hebrew, and yabam is the verbal form. So vayibem et Tamar. So he took Tamar as a levirate spouse, and so that there may be a seed, vahaya zera l'er, and there will be a seed to heir. So this is expressing, of course, a desire on the part of Judah. He wants Onan to give um, his elder brother Er a seed. But then in verse 9, it says here, Vayada Onan ki le'er yihye hazera, vayhi im yavo el eshet er, vashichet atza velo natan zera le'er. So Onan knew, and Onan knew, Yada is he knew, that ki that the seed will be to heir, or the seed will be heirs, and that will be if he goes to the wife of heir, or actually rather, and it was that he went to heir's wife, vashichet, and he wasted to the ground, arza. So remember, we learned the directional hay. Here's an example of the directional hay. He's wasted earthwards, literally, and he did not give a seed to heir. Verse 10, V'zot haita ra'a be'enei Adonai, v'yaharog Adonai gam et Onan. And this, so here is a demonstrative pronoun, was wicked in the eyes of the Lord. Another construct here. And the Lord killed also Onan. So Onan got his comeuppance for wasting his seed. And verse 11, we get this. Vayomer Yehuda letamar ki tavo almana et bet avia ad yigdal shela ki amar pen yamut gam hu ke'er u ka'onan v'teled tamar v'teshev bet avia. So let's try to translate this. And Judah said to Tamar, because she went a widow to the house of her father, or rather it's like she went as a widow to the house of her father until Shelah grows up, for he said, lest he would die, also he, a little bit redundant there, so it says lest Shelah, the remaining son, will also die, like Er and like Onan. So ka can mean like, as is the case in this instance. So vatelech Tamar, so Tamar walked, v'teshev, and she sat at the house of her father, or rather she dwelt at the house of her father, sorry. So yashav can mean to sit, or it can mean to dwell. The correct translation will depend on the context there. Let me see. So verse 12. Vayhi achar yamim rabim vatamar bat shua eshet Yehuda vayelech Yehuda lagoz et hatzon hu vachira ha'adulami. So it was after many days, many days. So yamim rabim, you've got the im ending indicating plural. Vet Tamar, and Tamar, the daughter of Shua, the wife of, sorry, uh, the wife of Yehuda, walked, wait, but Shua Eshet Yehuda, um, and she walked, and Judah walked to Goz. So this is a place, sorry. So it says Goz here. That means to shear. Sorry, I mistook this as a place name. This is actually a verb. So gazaz means to shear. The flock, he and Hira the Adulamite. So that's his father-in-law there. Verse 13. Timnata v'tishma tamar ki Yehuda halak timnata lagoz et hatzon. So it's like Timna words. That's where they went. And Tishma. And Tamar heard that Judah was walking Timna words to shear the flock. So in verse 14, you have Vatilbash bigde zona tachat bigde almanot vatasem tsaif vateshev בפתח עיניים אשר על דרך תמנתה כי ראתה כי גדל שלה ויהודה לא נתן את תמר לשלה לאישה. So it's a bit of a long verse. So she wore the garment of a zona or a harlot instead of. So tahat's interesting because it can mean under or it can be instead of. So in this case, it would make more sense to interpret this as instead of the garments of widows, bigde almanot, another construct, vatasem, and she placed a veil, tzaif, and she sat by the entrance of the enaim, so it's eyes or springs, better to be understood as springs in this context, which were upon the way of Timna words, because she saw that if Shelah grew up, Judah will not give Tamar to Shelah as a wife. So here you have two instances of the preposition le, but the first time means to, and the second time it means for. Just remember that the meaning of the preposition in any given instance is determined by its context. So pay close attention to context in these cases. Verse 15. Vayar Yehuda et haisha hazot, vayachshov et haisha lozona ki lo ra'a et pnei haisha. And Judah saw this woman, and she thought the woman to be a prostitute, because she did not see the face of the woman. So a little bit of fun fact. Prostitutes veiled in those days, as you can tell from here. So the fact that he didn't see her face was taken as evidence that she was a harlot. And verse 16, Vayavo el haisha ki lo yada ki tamar hi, and he went into the woman. So Yavo went to the woman because he did not know that she was Tamar. So ki also has multiple meanings. So it can mean that, it can mean for, it can mean because. So In the first instance, it means because. In the second instance, ki means that. So because he did not know that she was Tamar. Verse 17, Vayomer ki yishlach gdi me hatzon l'sachar v'tish'al eravon. And he said that he will send a young goat from the flock to Sachar to wait as a wage. So for a wage rather, he will send from the flock as a wage, and she asked for an eravon. So an eravon means a pledge. So it's like a collateral rather. Verse 18, Vayomer ma ha'eravon v'tish'al la chotemet la patil la mate asher beyad Yehuda vaiten vayavo el ha'isha vatahar liYehuda. And he said, what is the pledge? And she asked for the ring, or the seal rather. It's like a ring seal. And le patil, it's a cord. And the staff, mate is a staff, which is in Judah's hand. And he gave, and he went to the woman, and she conceived by Judah, or for Judah. So le, one of the other lesser meanings of le is by, so she conceived by Judah. Verse 19, so vatelech vatilbash bigde almanut tachat bigde zona. So she walked and she wore the garments of widowhood, almanut, instead of the garments of the adulteress. Verse 20, Vaishlach Yehuda gdi biyad Hira ha'adulami velo matza et hazona. So Judah sent the young goat in the hand of Hira, the Adulami, and he did not find the prostitute. Verse 21, Vatish'al et anshe hamakom al hazona asher be'enaim al hadarech va yomer lo haita vaze zona. And he asked the men of the place, another construct, about, like al usually means upon, in this instance it means about, the prostitute, the zona, which was in the springs upon the way, and they said there was no such prostitute. There was not in this a prostitute. Verse 22, Vayelech el Yehuda vayomer ki lo matza et hazona vegam anshe hamakom amru lo haita vaze zona. And so he walked to Judah and he said, because I do not know the prostitute, and also the men of the place said there was no prostitute. And then verse 23, Vayomer Yehuda tichach ha eravon pen yihye lavuz. So, and Judah said, she took the pledge, lest it will be for contempt. So I'm not entirely sure how to like idiomatically translate it, but that is what it is. That is what it says literally. And then verse 24, Vayhi אחר ימים רבים ואנשי מקום אמרו כי זנתה תמר וגם הנה הרה ויאמר יהודה כי תמות תמר. So this is where here's where it reached the climax. And there was, after many days, and the men of the place said that Zanta, she played the whore, Tamar played the whore, or she was prostituting herself, and also, behold, she conceived. And Judah said, so, like for, Tamar will die. Because of this, rather. Verse 25. ותשלח תמר אל יהודה ותאמר לאיש אשר אלה אנוכי הרה הכר נא את החותמת והפתיל והמטה האלה. So here's Tamar fighting back, and Tamar sent to Judah, and she said, to the man which these are, I conceived. So it's like, identify recognize the seal and the cord and the staff, these things. And then verse 26, Velohar. So, wait, hold on. In verse 26, Velohargu et Tamar ki tzadka mihuda ki lo natan et Tamar l'shale leisha vateshev bevet Yehuda velo yada et Tamar od. And they did not kill Tamar because she was more righteous than Judah. So you notice that the preposition me is used here, so it doesn't just mean from. So this literally says she was righteous from Judah, but this is a statement of comparison. It's saying she is more righteous than Judah because he did not give Tamar to Shelah as a wife. And she dwelt in the house of Judah, and he did not know her again. And then we're almost done with this reading. 4 more verses. Verse 27. Vahika asher yalda vahine hayu tomim. So, and it was just as she begat, and behold, there was twins. There were twins. So this is the word for twin. And then verse 28. Vayhi be'et hahi vahine ben echad natan yad vayashimu shani al hayad vayomru ze yatsa rishona. So we haven't learned numbers and ordinals yet, but just note this is the word for first. I'll make note of that because that's going to come up next week, or next episode. And it was in that time, and behold, son number 1, Ben Echad, and he gave the hand, or he stretched out the hand, Yashimo. It's like they placed Shani, the scarlet. It's like the scarlet thread upon the hand, and they said, he came out first. And then verse 29, Vayetze ben ha'echad Rishona vayomru ma paretz vaykraet shem haben hahu paretz. And he went out, and the son went out, the other son went out first, and they said, "What a breach." So parets mean breach or entrance. So they called the name of the son parets. They named him after a breach. Imagine that. And then finally, verse 30, Ve'achar yatsa ha'ach asher shani al hayad vayikra et shem haben hazeh Zarach. So, and afterwards, the brother went out, which the scarlet thread was upon the hand, and he called the name of the son, of this son rather, Zerach. So, which comes from the word for sunrise. So, this book. I see someone is asking what book this is. It's Learning Biblical Hebrew Workbook. So this is the companion workbook to the main textbook we're reading, which is Learning Biblical Hebrew, Reading for Comprehension, published by Lexham Press. As I mentioned in the first session, this is the main textbook that I'm going to be using. And these are just simplified versions of readings from Genesis that we're translating. So hopefully this will give you an idea of how to translate. I really strongly suggest that you guys get the workbook on your own and try to do the exercises for yourselves, because nothing facilitates language learning better than actually taking the original text and translating for yourself. So now that that's done, we'll get to the grammar portion of this. So we're covering chapter 8, which is called Pronominal Suffix and Review of Definiteness. Now, in order to understand how pronominal suffixes work, we first need to discuss pronouns in Hebrew. And you may have already run into a few of the pronouns in Hebrew. So in English, of course, you know the standard ones: I, you, he, her, it, they. I don't know how many pronouns exist in the English language before, but these are all of the traditional ones. And I want you to notice that English, compared to a lot of other languages, has a fairly simplified pronoun system. For example, in English, we don't distinguish between second person singular and second person plural. At some point in the past, we did. So the second person singular in English was thou, and the plural form was ye, which at some point became you. And then at some point, we got used to just using you for both the plural and the singular, so thou dropped out. And now we have this. But in most other languages besides English, we still distinguish between singular and plural second person. For example, those of you who know Spanish, you would say tú eres in singular. So tú is the pronoun, and an eres is like the thing that comes after it. And then in the plural form, you would say something like either ustedes or vosotros, depending on what Spanish-speaking country you come from. So most other languages besides English still maintains this distinction, and of course Hebrew is no exception. But one other distinction that Hebrew pronouns make that English or most other European languages don't is between second person singular and second person singular masculine and second person singular feminine. And actually it's the same plural too. So there's really 4 different yous in Hebrew. So you have singular feminine you have singular masculine you have plural masculine you, and then you have plural feminine you. And this could be if you over time you get used to it, but if especially if you have knowledge of prior Semitic languages like Arabic, which do the same thing, but Indo-European languages generally do not make that distinction in the second person. Although some European languages do make that distinction for the third person. Again, to use Spanish as an example, if you say they, it could be either ellos or ellas. And in Hebrew, it does the same thing. So the third person plural could be hem or hen, or depending on whether it is an all-male group or a mixed group or an all-female group. And when you get a mixed gender group, you tend to just use the masculine. And that's the case with almost every language that I know of, that the masculine is default used for a mixed gender group. So now that you know what a pronoun is and how pronouns work in Hebrew, we'll get to pronominal suffixes. And a pronominal suffix, in summary, is a suffix that you add at the end of a noun to indicate its relation to a certain pronoun. And this relation often, but not always, is possession. So for this chapter, we're using the word sus, which means horse. And there's the feminine form susa, which means mare. So there are a bunch of pronominal suffixes that you can add to that, but the example given here is susi, and translated to English, that means my horse. Now, it's not just nouns that take pronominal suffixes, it's also prepositions. So remember, in a previous episode, we discussed prepositions like le, b, and k. So you can actually attach pronominal suffixes directly onto them. So if I want to say something is to me or is for me, I can say li. If I want to say something is inside me, I can say b, so the b with the e. Or if I say something is actually, I won't use k as an example for reasons that I'll explain later on. The k doesn't actually take pronominal suffixes. I just remembered there's a separate form for that, which it comes later in this chapter. So one thing to note, all pronominal suffixes are technically object suffixes. So that pronominal suffix functions as the object of the sentence. So if I say Susi, I mean, you would translate this as my horse, but think of it like saying a horse to me. So it's telling you that, me, I am the indirect object in that sentence, while the horse is the subject. So, and this is something that you should make note of when you're trying to basically figure out the structure of a Hebrew sentence, knowing what each noun or pronoun is functioning as. Pronominal suffixes attach directly at the end of the noun or the preposition. So in most cases, it's a fairly simple thing. You just tack it onto the end. Sometimes it will modify the word it is attached to. So we'll look at some examples of pronominal suffixes using the word sus. So if I want to say something is his horse, suso, suso, her horse, susa. So this one, be careful with this one, because the he at the end could indicate a feminine form, or it could indicate feminine third person possession. And how you know the difference, the pronominal suffix version of it has a dagesh right here. Now, your horse, assuming I'm speaking to a single guy, is suscha. And If it's a girl, your horse, it's susech. If I'm trying to indicate something is my horse, I say susi. If I want to say something is their horse, it's susam. If the group I'm referring to is all female, I would say Susan, not to be confused by the name Susan. So if I'm addressing a group of people, Suschem, this is your horse, all your horse. Unless that group is all female, in which case you say Suschen. And then finally, if we're in a communist country and the horse belongs to everyone, I would say our horse, Susenu. So this is try to memorize this chart. There are a bunch of tables with charts in chapter 8. And this is why you need to have the textbook so that you can use it to memorize these charts. Of course, if you can't afford it, the alternative is that you can just pause the video at this exact point and then just stare at this chart for a few minutes until you've memorized it. And I'm going to try to pause the video for at least a few seconds at each chart, so you would be able to do that for the benefit of those who don't have the textbook. So one thing to note, the pronominal suffixes do attach to construct endings. So I mentioned that we're also going to encounter the feminine form suza. So in that case, what do we do? So what we do is that we attach the suffix at the end, just as usual. However, the hey, it's turned into a tav. So susa. So if I want to say your horse to a group, I would say susatchem, susatchem. So there's a bunch of other forms of this. So I'm saying so if it's your male horse to a group of people, it's suschem. If it's your female horse, it's susatchem. If I'm saying your horses, you have a group of horses, susechem. But if you have a group of horses that are all female, susotechem. So you've got 3 extra syllables attached there, susotechem. So notice that the a is added to this as well. So there's a little note here that says feminine plural words always add the masculine plural construct to ot when attaching suffixes. Again, try to memorize this. So here are a few more. Here's another chart. So a chart of pronominal suffixes. So here are a few sample ways that something can be said. So this is for plural. So let's say he has a group of horses, or he has his horses. I would say susav. So the pronunciation is a little bit tricky here because the yod here is technically silent. So it's not susayu. That's weird. You would say susav. And in other places it's not silenced. For example, her horses, suseya. But if it's your horses, male, you are man, you have horses, I would say susecha. But if you're a woman, I would say susaich for your horses. If I have a lot of horses, I would refer to them as susai. Their horses, if it's all male or mixed group, suseihem. If it's an all-female group I'm referring to, it's suseihen. If I'm referring to you in the plural, it's suseichem for your horses. Unless you're all women, in which case I would say suseichen. And finally, once again, returning to communist country, if our horses would be suseinu, suseinu. And how many different combinations can we come up with for these pronominal suffix? The answer is here. if you want to indicate the possession of a horse or a female horse or a group of horses or a group of female horses, here are all of the possible variations that you could come up with. And I realize this is a lot. So don't worry too much about memorizing this exact list. Just try to memorize, first of all, the different permutations, and then the different pronominal suffixes, and then it will come to you intuitively. So here you'll notice that there are basically 40 possible combinations of pronominal suffixes. So, in summary, to translate, you need to accurately identify the base word and prefix. In the beginning, you will have to rely heavily on memorization, but faithful practice will result in the suffix endings becoming intuitive. And that's the thing with a lot of Hebrew grammar. You do a lot of this memorization in the beginning, and it can be intimidating to a beginner, but over time, it becomes easy to you, and you just learn to identify them like it becomes second nature to you. Now, let's discuss the syntax of pronominal suffixes. The thing to note about them is that they are always considered definite, even though they never have the definite article. So you would never say, for example, ha-su-si. And the reason for that is because the moment you add a pronominal suffix to a word, you've already made it definite. So if I say susi, I'm already referring to a specific horse, and that horse happens to be my horse. So pronominal suffixes indicate that the author is referring to a specific object. Now, how about a construct chain? So remember, we discussed construct chains where you have two or more nouns connected together, which form an X of Y meaning. So the example given here, Har Kodshi, if you translate this as literally, it is the mountain of my holiness. So a few things to note. One is that when a construct chain has a pronominal suffix, the entire construct chain is definite. So neither Har nor Kodshi have a definite article, but this whole thing is definite because this has a pronominal suffix, which makes it definite, and it's part of a construct chain, which makes everything else that's in the construct chain definite. Note that in Hebrew, you always add the pronominal suffix to the last word in the construct chain. So you wouldn't say Hari Kodesh for the mountain of for my holy mountain. You would say Har Kodshi. And note, there's actually two ways to translate this: the mountain of my holiness, which is the literal way of saying it, or if you want to be idiomatic, it means my holy mountain. And there's a few other examples of this in the Bible. For example, this is technically a Greek example, but in 2 Corinthians, St. Paul refers to Jesus as the Lord of glory. So the Lord of glory, however, you can also translate that as meaning the glorious Lord. So construct chains are fun like that, and that's technically a Greek example, but the same rule tends to bleed, that is found in Hebrew, tends to bleed into Greek at times. So some more notes. So when pronominal suffixes appear on prepositions, rely on your knowledge of English to translate them correctly. So translation is more art than it is science. So you don't want to translate a text woodenly literal, right? Because it will become nonsense. Like word order will be different, and certain expressions just aren't going to make sense in a language other than Hebrew. So you have to know how to express something in good idiomatic English. And this is, of course, the case with using pronominal suffixes. So the example given here would be be, so the b with the first person suffix. Literally, that's in me. However, in some places, it would literally be in I or in my. And also note that the preposition l has pronominal suffixes attached to it frequently to indicate possession. So here are a few examples. Kol asherli, all which is to me. All that is mine. All I have. Those are different ways of saying it idiomatically in English. Yeshli ven. So literally, there is to me a son. But idiomatically, you want to translate that as I have a son. In past tense, haya li ven. There was to me a son. Or in good idiomatic English, you would say, I had a son. So now, I just want to, I'll show some examples in the Bible later of this, because best way to demonstrate this is with actual texts. But first, I want to cover a couple more things. So there are some compound prepositions. So I mentioned that this form k doesn't take pronominal suffixes, and that's because it has an alternate form that does. It's the form kmo. Now, kmo does sometimes appear by itself, but often it comes with a preposition, with a pronominal suffix attached to it. And then min has an alternate form, mimen, and that I do not recall off the top of my head it ever appearing by itself like that. It always has a pronominal suffix attached to it. And for most cases, you attach the suffix directly, but there are a couple of places where you don't. So you wouldn't, for like me or as me, you wouldn't say kmo-i. Instead, you also add a nun there. So it's actually kamo-ni. And the same thing happens with mimen. So mimen-ni. So notice that a dagesh appears on the nun. That indicates that the nun is technically doubled. It's mimen-ni. And here's where it gets a little bit confusing, because mimen, there is the form mimenu, which could be from us, or it can be from him. And that's because normally the ending for from him is hu. However, the h gets assimilated into the nun and it doubles. So here, mimenu can mean from him or from us. And which one it means at any given point is determined by the context. Context is king in a lot of these circumstances. Make note of where this form occurs and what would make the most sense as a translation. Once again, here is a table. Memorize this table. Or, you don't actually have to memorize this table. Just memorize the pronominal suffixes and which cases it joins slightly differently. It's primarily in these three cases, four rather. Here's one as well. So make note of that. Finally, the pronominal suffix can attach to the direct definite object marker. Remember, the word et comes up a lot to indicate that the noun that comes right after it is the direct object of the verb. Well, guess what? You can attach a pronoun to et. And when you attach a pronoun to et, that indicates that the object of the verb is the thing, the antecedent of that pronoun. So oto is, so note that the et actually changes its form. It becomes ot. So here, indicated here, and then you add the suffix to it. So here are the forms of it. Oto for him, ota for her, otach or otcha for you. For you female, it's otech. Oti is me. Otam or etchem is them. Otan or ethen is them, female. So here's a few cases where it remains et, actually. So it doesn't always change to ot. It does most of the time, but not here. Etchem for you plural, etchen for you plural, female. And finally, otanu is us. And interestingly, there's an alternate form, which is it, and there it would mean with. So iti, ita, itcha, or itach, itech, iti, itam, itan, itchem, itchen, and itanu. So note this chart. So having covered the pronominal suffixes, you will have learned all of the different ways that a pronoun, I believe that's all the different ways that a pronoun can be used. We also covered demonstrative pronouns in a previous chapter, I believe. And also we've covered all the different ways that a noun can be definite. And here we see that there are actually 4 different ways that a noun can be definite. So let's review them. First, a noun can be definite if it has the definite article. So ha, melech, the king. It can be definite if it is a proper noun. So Shmuel is an example of that. It can be definite if it has a pronominal suffix, which is what we learned, which is koli. And then finally, it can be definite if it is a construct with the definite noun, which is the horse of the king, sus hamelech. So these are all of the examples of definiteness that occur in Hebrew. And before we conclude, I want to show you a few examples of these kinds of constructions. So these are all in the first couple chapters of Genesis. So first, I want to go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. I'm just going to read the first clause in it. Vayevarech otam Elohim vayomer lahem Elohim. So, and God blessed them. Note that here is them functioning as a direct object. Otam vayomer lahem Elohim, and God said to them. So la plus hem. You can also say God told them, but the point is this is a preposition with the suffix. And then if you want to see other examples, we can go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. Vayvarech Elohim et Yom HaShvi'i vaykadesh oto ki vo shavat mikol malachto asher bara Elohim lasot. So you have oto, which is God sanctified it. He sanctified it. This is it. Because in it, so you have the preposition ba plus the pronominal suffix o, because in it he rested from all his works. And then finally, one last example that I want to throw at you. Genesis 2, verse 17. Ume'etz hada'ato vera lo tochal mimenu, ki bayom acholcham mimenu mot tamut. And from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you will not eat from it. Mimenu. So from plus the alternate form of from, mimen, plus the pronominal suffix u. For in the day you eat from it, the same form again, you will surely die. Motamut. So that is pronominal suffix is in a nutshell. So to give you a look ahead at what we're going to cover the next time you do Hebrew, we're going to do some more prefixes and suffixes, because there are different kinds of prefixes and suffixes you can run into in Hebrew, and pronominal suffixes just happens to be one of the most important ones. Also, we're also going to learn numbers, which is chapter 10. So we're going to cover 2 chapters next week. And numbers in this context is both cardinal and ordinal numbers. All right. That is it for this session.
I don't see any chat questions, Lewis. Yeah, I put it in there a few minutes ago. I'm not seeing any. There's somebody saying, what book is that? But
I mentioned it at the beginning.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So for those who were here for the first session, I mentioned what the title is, and I also gave the syllabus. But in case you missed it, here's the main textbook: Learning Biblical Hebrew, Reading for Comprehension and Introductory Grammar, by Carl Kutz and Rebecca Josberger, published by Lexham Press. And it comes with a workbook, which is where I get the translation exercises. Learning Biblical Hebrew Workbook, a graded reader with exercises. Both of these I am using from Verbum or Logos because it's cheaper to get it that way.
Yeah, excellent. That is the only one that I spotted there in the chat, and you also gave us a sneak peek of what we'll have next. So I think that's it, unless you had any concluding remarks there.
Well, if you have been able to follow along Hebrew up to this point, that means that you've already learned a good bit of Hebrew, enough to make a few simple translations. If you have, I really strongly recommend get the textbook and then memorize those charts, read through the descriptions yourself. And the other thing that you can do, go read some Hebrew texts directly. Go on Bible Gateway, turn on the Hebrew Bible there. Read maybe the first chapter of Genesis. You might not get most of it, but you will identify certain words, certain grammatical points that we've discussed, and that will help you to get direct exposure to the language, which is the best way to learn it.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you for doing this, Lewis. I look forward to the next one.
My pleasure.
All right. Everybody, thank y'all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, check us out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology. We'll see y'all next time. God bless. Oh, wait. There we go.
If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent. Now, that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about